Hi, my name is Peter Foltz, and I'm going to be talking to you about some research we've been doing over a long period of time around applying AI for assessing mental states with a focus of how do we use language to assess those mental states. This work is not just mine. It has a large number of collaborators across a variety of industries and academia, across a range of different countries as well. And I believe that's really one of the only ways that you can be successful is to bring together people with diverse approaches to be able to successfully do this kind of work. So the key point that I'd like you to come away with in this talk is that I view language as a window to being able to understand the underlying cognitive structures and mental states of people. And we can look at the content and structure of language to be able to understand some of those cognitive and mental states. We can look at their knowledge, we can look at how coherent or disorganized their language is, we can look at the sophistication of their lexical, their use of words, we can look at the complexity of their syntax, we can look at how much content they provide when they speak. We're able to get at aspects like the clarity of their thinking or whether they tend to have morbid ideation. Similarly, we can also look at nonverbal aspects of speech. We can look at how they change the rate of their speaking, the changes in their pitch, how it varies. We can look at their fluency in the language. We can also look at their psychomotor activation. That is, are they speaking really quickly? Are they speaking loudly, softly? And this allows us to get at aspects of affect. The nice thing about using language is that the difference in people's use of language from what we would consider norms can indicate different kinds of problems. And changes over time could indicate changes in a particular patient's state. So, for example, there's been a lot of research on bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, MCI, Alzheimer's disease, which has shown that changes over time can indicate these kinds of changes. The trouble is, how do you reliably and sensitively detect these changes? Now, in clinical discourse, we know that language is used as a major approach to understanding these mental states and is used widely in the diagnosis. So there's a variety of different kinds of examinations, ranging from things like the mini mental status exam, asking people to recall stories in a memory scale, do word associations, verbal memory, or even through interviews or doing therapy or open discourse. All of these use language, and a therapist's role is really to be able to listen and detect various different aspects of semantics, syntax, changes in language to be able to diagnose and understand people's mental states. So the question that we're really addressing is, how can we automatically analyze clinical discourse? And why would we want to analyze clinical discourse? Well, there's a variety of things that we can get out of that. We can predict the presence of mental disorders. We could also potentially measure the severity of a disorder. We can also use this to look at patients over time to detect subtle longitudinal changes. From a more theoretical side, we can also look and try to understand what is the relation between this language and the underlying etiology of these mental disorders. If we see changes in brain structure, what does that indicate about language? What does that indicate about patients' mental states? And as such, we can use language as a variety of different ways of being biomarkers for patients. So, for example, we can look at coherence as a biomarker and say, do changes in a patient's coherence indicate anything about changes in their mental state? We can also provide richer information to a clinician faster if we can analyze language automatically. And this should allow us to be able to do very sensitive and timely assays of patients and be able to give that information to the clinician. So there's a lot of benefits if we can automatically analyze clinical discourse. And so I'm going to show you one example today and point you to a lot of other research that we're doing as well. But the real question we want to address is, how do we apply these automated techniques? So what I'm going to talk about are some approaches we're using that are using both a mixture of machine learning as well as natural language processing to analyze a range of different aspects in language. We look at semantics using techniques like semantic vector space representations of language, and this is techniques like latent semantic analysis, word2vec, and BERT, and essentially these techniques can detect changes in semantics or the meaning of what people are expressing. We also use a variety of statistical natural language processing measures. So we look at n-grams, which measure how frequently one word is used with other words. We can parse the structure of the syntax. We can count different types of words. We can look at certain kinds of words and how often they're used. We also look at acoustic features. So we run automated speech recognition, but we also look at aspects like how does the change in a person's frequencies coming out of their voice, or what is that rate, what is the pitch, or how fluent are they. Combining all of these allows us to give us a much wider computational approach to look at a variety of different aspects of changes in people and their mental states. So our approach to this really is we analyze everything by looking at the semantic, statistical, and acoustical features. We derive these features. We then perform machine learning, which then selects and weighs these various different features, and then we use this as the basis to predict mental states. Now, to give some idea of where we're doing this, we are doing this work within the context of a larger system that we've developed called Delta Mental Status Exam, or DEMSE, DMSE. We also have a version that's used in Norway called MinTest. And the idea of this is it's a system for helping clinicians assess the mental state of patients. And it's an iPhone-based device where patients will do a variety of different tasks, and we collect data live, and then we can actually analyze that data. And the idea of this is that we can have sort of an analysis pipeline, that we can record people's language, we can record people's actions. Then we perform a variety of analyses, acoustic analyses, we can transcribe the audio, we can perform analyses of the semantics, the meaning they're expressing. And then we do a combined model of this, and that model can output information that can give actionable inferences about the patient state that can be used by the clinician. To give you an idea of the kinds of different tasks that are used in DEMSE, there's a wide range of different tasks. These are some of them. So in the upper left-hand corner, the first one, you might see a picture, and you're just supposed to describe what you're seeing in that picture. So you have to speak out loud, describe as much as possible. You may also get a variety of things where you might have to see numbers, and you have to then press numbers after you've heard them. Or you might have to do some other kinds of physical things like seeing dots appearing on the screen and remember them in order. But you may also have to do more verbal things like number 9 here, where you would listen to a story and then have to retell that story. And so for today, I'm going to focus on analyses of some work we've done with this. Essentially what we're doing is a version of story recall. So how does this work? Essentially what we are doing is measuring verbal memory. So a person using the device would be given the instructions to listen to a story that will be read out loud to them. Then they have to just retell the story with as many details as they can remember. And they'll actually have to retell the story almost immediately after they hear it, but then they may be asked to do it 10 minutes later. They may also be asked to do it a day later in order to retell the story. So for example, they may hear an audio prompt where they hear a story about balloons, and they give a verbal retelling of that story. So here's an example of a patient's retelling that story. We can have people rate the quality of those retellings of the story in terms of the accuracy, the facts that they retrieved, and whether they put things into the right kinds of structures, whether they got the right narrative structure. In this case, the average of several humans rating this gave it of 3.07 on a scale of 1 to 6. So in this, I'll go through an example where we collected a large number of recordings. In this case, we have 79 recordings from healthy participants and 25 recordings from patients. We then took those stories and we had humans listen to those stories, and they rated those stories. They rated them on the use of the concepts and the quality of their theme recall on a scale of 0 to 6. And as you can see here, the mean rating for the healthy participants was 4.5. For patients, it was 2.8. We found that overall, we had a large number of clinicians doing the ratings. We found that overall, the correlation between raters was between about 0.73 and about 0.89. So pretty good, but not perfect. But as you can see, there is some difference between patients and the healthy controls we used. Now, what we really wanted to do was say, how could we use machine learning-based approaches to mimic those ratings? So what we did was to do what we're first calling a hybrid procedure. In this hybrid procedure, what we did was to take the human transcripts, and we analyzed the transcripts, and we derived, in this case, two different measures from the transcripts. One is the number of word types in common. What that is looking at is how many words were in the original story and how many of those words were recalled in the patient's recall. We also look at a measure called the word mover's distance. Now, word mover's distance is a measure that looks at both semantic and syntactic features simultaneously and looks at how much change is there from the patient's recall to the original story and how much has changed. I'll give an example here. So, for example, if the original sentence that was given was "the boy bicycled on the path," and the recall that was given is "Stanley biked on the sidewalk," what we're essentially doing is automatically doing a mapping to say how many words need to be moved around, both in terms of their position, their role in the sentence, but also how semantically they relate to each other in order to be able to get the same sentence. So in this case, we can map Stanley to the boy, biked to bicycled, and sidewalk to path. This, we can sum up the number of words that had to be moved around or semantically transformed slightly, and in this case, we come up with a score of 3.44. Now, to change bike to bicycled is not that much, but as you can see, that if the patient had recalled a sentence like "Christopher ate the pizza," you'll see that Christopher does map to boy, but ate does not map well to bicycle, and pizza does not map as well to path. So you get a larger word movers score, which says that it takes more work to transform that sentence into the original sentence that they heard. If we combine these measures using a regression model, what we find is that we can take the human transcripts and predict the human scores with a correlation of 0.86. So we can do about as well as the humans agree with each other in order to be able to predict the scores that humans give on these recalls. Now, of course, when we do this, what you can see is this is what a correlation of 0.86 looks like. As you can see, in the blue, tend to get more of the healthy participants scoring higher here. The red patients tend to be a little bit more all over the place. But you can see there's a very strong correlation between the predicted ratings and the human ratings. In addition, if you look at the distribution of the scores, you can see that there is really two separate distributions of patients and participants. And indeed, if we run a classifier that tries to sort of break down those distributions based on that predicted rating, we can predict patients versus healthy controls with about 76% accuracy. Now, using this approach is fine, but the problem is we're using human transcripts for analyzing it. And nobody has the time to type in transcripts first or transcribe all the audio in order for it to be automatically analyzed. So what we did then was to take these recordings and also run them through automated speech recognition. And we tried this two different ways. One was using a generic off-the-shelf automated speech recognizer. The other was to develop a custom automated speech recognition system that was tuned to the participants and tuned to the stories they were telling. What we can see is that if we use a generic automated speech recognition system, we're getting fairly high error rates. For patients, it's almost 50% of the words are interpreted wrong by this speech recognition system, and about a third of them for the healthy participants. Whereas with the custom ASR, we're getting about 20% error rate with patients and about 9% error rate with healthy controls. However, if we take this data and then apply it into the model, we can still get very high correlations to the human ratings. In this case, with the generic system, with 0.83, with the custom system, 0.84. This is pretty much just as close as what we were getting with the human transcripts, which says that we can use a fully automatic approach where we can take recordings, run them through a customized speech recognition system, break down the features, and then predict what the human ratings should be for those stories. Now, what are the implications of this? One is I've just shown you one result today. As you saw when I first showed the Dempsey, we are collecting data from about 10 different types of tasks. Some of them are verbal tasks, some of them are more physical tasks like tapping, but we're doing analyses across a wide range of these different types of tasks, as well as combining information across them. But the key point that I want you to take from this is that what we've really can show is that language can provide a window into the mental states. We're able to automatically take the audio, analyze the speech from it, convert that into a variety of language measures, and then put out a prediction that very accurately predicts the quality of a patient or controls recall of a story. And that can provide good predictions about the quality of their memory. So the conclusion we have from this is that AI-based analyses can provide reliable assays of dysfunction in language and memory. And where we see this really being used is in a complete pipeline where we can run from the data collection through the analysis to provide actionable inferences to the patient's state. Now, the reason that we've been very successful at doing this is that we use highly multidisciplinary teams. On our team, we have people who understand the clinical states, who understand patients. We also have AI researchers. We also have people who understand assessment, and we have good technical people. But together, those people are allow us to be able to really build these pipelines that incorporate both an understanding of the clinical context as well as how to apply machine learning in appropriate ways. Now, finally, I wanted to talk a little bit more generally about these implications for using AI in psychiatry, because just showing a result like this and say, look, we can mimic human performance on one test doesn't mean that we're ready to deploy anything in a psychiatric assessment. And one of the things that I and my colleagues have emphasized a lot is that we need to ensure that when we're applying these kinds of AI approaches, that we have developed approaches that can be trustworthy to the clinicians, trustworthy to the patients, trustworthy to the whole clinical system that would use them. And one of the things we've developed is a framework for trustworthiness for the use of AI. And it rests on three primary tenets: explainability. Can the models provide some kind of explainability about what is going on when they make their judgments? Transparency, that is, can a clinician use this and understand what is being measured and be able to decide how to use that in clinical decision making? And generalizability. Do these results generalize across the wide range of populations so that they can be trusted to be used in any particular clinical case? And really, before we start to try to deploy any kind of AI in psychiatry, we really need to think about a larger joint effort of clinicians, computer scientists, researchers, lawyers, to understand all these implications and to work together to figure out what is the best way to ensure that these kinds of tools are being used in the best way. And my philosophy of this is what we really want to do is leverage the best of what AI does and leverage the best of what humans do. AI is not going to replace what humans do, but AI can do some of the components that humans don't need to do, but there are places where we still think that humans will do best. So with that, I want to thank you, and I also want to thank all of my contributors and collaborators who have worked on this project as well. And I would be happy to take email questions or anything if you'd like to follow up. Thank you.